Hey, hi, hello. I've had to redo this 5 times now. First time I was being awkward. Second time I kept repeating things. Third time I didn't really get to the point. Fourth time my mother walked in asking if I wanted a drink, and here we are. Um, so yeah, this is going to be my first like art tutorial on YouTube. It's basically just going to be a fur shading tutorial, how I shade fur, rabbit fur in particular, um, because I asked on a certain amino if I should do it, which was a rabbit amino, but I'm not going to get into the details. Anyway, this is just going to be a basic, easy fur shading tutorial. It doesn't have too many steps. It doesn't have like 500 layers or anything. So I already started shading the fur before I got the actual idea of recording and making a tutorial. But I will just make this layer invisible and create a new one. So the first thing I like to do for shading is I like to create a new layer, put it to multiply, and make it a clipping group layer, which clips itself on top of the flat colored layer or any layer that's on the bottom, so it won't go outside of the line art. For other art programs, I'm pretty sure that there's ways of doing this. If not, you could just like erase what you've gotten outside of the line art, but yeah. And for colors, I like to use pretty like basic colors. Like I'm not going to be shading the fur with like a green color or anything. Like for fur shading, I like to stay like in like the purpley to the blue zones, but I like to make it also like on more of the gray tone, less saturation, a less saturated tone of the actual color, like if it were to be right here. So yeah. So after I do that, I start shading, but my favorite tool to use as a shading tool would be the marker tool on Sai, or this water tool that I made. This one is I like to use more for like different shading layers, but you could use it for fur as well. But lately I've been using the marker tool, just the regular marker, and putting it down to about 40–50% opacity, density I mean, because of course you don't want it to be too harsh. That's why I don't use something like the regular line art tool, which would make it much too harsh. For my liking at least. You can go ahead and do whatever you'd like, but of course you could just use this as a reference tutorial and tailor it to your needs, but I'm talking too much. Let's just get into the actual shading part. So first, you may want to study the animal's anatomy that you're going to draw, for not just for actual anatomy reasons, but for the way the fur flows and how the lengths of the fur, stuff like that. So this is just a regular, like I think it might be a Rex rabbit that I'm drawing. It's a request for someone. So it's longer fur areas would of course be its tail and around its stomach and stuff. But if I were to be drawing a lionhead rabbit or something, or an Angora, it would have fur like almost all over its body. So those would be longer, flowier strands of fur. But like I said, you could tailor this to your needs no matter what you're drawing, as long as it's a furry animal. Yeah. But now that we got like the basics down about how the fur would flow and how long it is, you can get into the actual shading part. So for the shading parts, you're not gonna, of course, no one has time or patience, at least I don't, and even if I did, it always ends up looking kind of weird the way I do it. well, in my opinion, how I used to do it, when I would just do single layer, like if you were to shade fur like this with just constant lines, but like a lot more tedious. Sure, that can come out more realistic, but it could also go horrible in my experience. But that's why I like to separate fur into different chunks. So I will separate this piece of fur into this chunk, like so. So that's one. And it just depends on the way the fur is flowing too. Like if fur is flowing this way, you want to make a chunk like that. You won't want to make like a chunk, say, like that right here. So I like to start with chunks of fur and just go off of that. So here's another chunk right here. And right here. I'm not going to do a bunch because this is just the basics. Like I'm not going to go through the whole thing or else it'll just be repetitive and very time consuming on your part if you're watching this, because it would be a very long video. But now that you have the chunks, what I like to do now is I like to shade the main outline of the chunks a little bit more, make them more prominent, because this is kind of, you want to see like the chunks that you're drawing so it just doesn't look like a bunch of random furs, if that makes any sense. So I just like to make them more prominent by adding more depth to these areas. And now that you've gotten the chunks, you're probably thinking, wait, what about that part? So that part, when you think of chunks of fur, like take your hair for example, like look at your hair. If it's pointing the direction of the light, it'll have highlights about in the middle, like right here. So what I like to do is I like to go in with lines. You don't have to make them perfect. They just, because fur isn't perfect, nothing is perfect, but just don't look like, I do whatever you want, but for me, I just don't like to touch too many in the middle or else that'll just defeat the purpose of highlights. So I like to keep the middle pretty plain with no shading of these areas. You get more of the look of a highlighted fur rather than more tedious bits of fur. And I will just repeat that with every chunk of fur I did until it all is complete and put together. This is actually one of my favorite parts of drawing animals, is the fur shading and stuff, because it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be super precise, because fur isn't perfect. I mean, it's not just going to be going one direction or anything. You can make mistakes and get away with it. So yeah. And now that we have the basic fur idea right here, we can start going on to different lengths of fur. So for this type of shading, you might use, like on the tail, of course, I like to use it mostly on the tail. You can do it somewhat like over here, like halfway type of thing and stuff. So you can just tailor it to your needs. But for, say, like the shorter fur, like on the thighs and stuff, you will want to start out shorter. I don't like to start in the middle, but you can just make kind of a guideline of where the hair is going to be flowing out from. Once again, it doesn't have to be perfect. They don't all have to be the same lengths. because hair is not perfect. And you can do that so it flows out this way because this is the middle. But when you start out, you want to start out with longer strands of fur as it goes out. So this is just, you just want to keep doing this kind of all around it, but as you get more to the middle, make the strokes smaller. Like if the strokes were this long out here, as I get to the middle or something, my strokes will turn more into something like this. Because as fur like flows out, it doesn't become so compacted, so it can just be more long and flowy, I guess. But if it's more in the middle, it'll be more compact and you will want to draw it shorter. So yeah. So that's basically like what I do for shading fur. It's not any secret or anything. It's pretty easy, pretty fast. I'm not making like a million layers just for fur, just one layer, maybe two sometimes. But this is basically all I do for shading fur. So yeah, have fun drawing your fur. Goodbye.